One of the beautiful things about exercise is that it can be done in so many different ways and molded to fit your goals and interests. But are there some forms of exercise and principles that should be non-negotiable or absolute staples in your exercise routine? Well, if you're not only trying to optimize your fitness, but also your overall health and longevity, then the answer is yes. So in today's video, we're gonna discuss some of these incredible health and fitness benefits that comes with this form of exercise. And this will help us understand why almost everyone should consider it. And of course, we'll talk about how to do this form of training and how to incorporate it into your weekly routine. We'll also have a little bit of a fun discussion dispelling some of the myths around lactic acid and what lactic acid actually does to your muscles. It's gonna be an awesome one. So let's do this. So what is this all-important type of exercise? Well, it's a form of that dreaded cardio. And maybe I should say dreaded only for some, because there are definitely plenty of you out there that can't get enough of this type of training. But this type of cardiovascular training is designed to build your aerobic foundation or your aerobic base. And it's often referred to as Zone 2 training. And the Zone 2 type of training is a form of steady state cardio done at about a moderate level of intensity. And again, we're gonna definitely talk about how you can find your own personal Zone 2, as well as how to incorporate it into your routine. But let's first answer this question of why should everyone consider this type of training? Because it makes sense for somebody like an endurance athlete or people who are interested in long distance running or long distance cycling. Makes sense for them to do this type of training. But what about somebody like a powerlifter? Or maybe even someone like me who likes to play a lot of basketball? Because I can tell you, we didn't do a lot of Zone 2 training to get in shape for basketball. Well, we're gonna answer this by talking about the incredible physiological adaptations and changes that occur within your body due to Zone 2 training, and how that translates to what I would consider universal fitness and health benefits. Zone 2 training will strengthen the muscle of the heart, which obviously will help to improve fitness, and this can also lead to improvements in resting heart rate as well as even blood pressure, which that can help to reduce your overall risk of cardiovascular conditions over the long term. Zone 2 training also has an amazing effect on your muscles, specifically the slow twitch muscle cells or the slow twitch muscle fibers. Now, if you've watched this before, you've likely heard us talk about slow twitch versus fast twitch muscle fibers and even some of the intermediate fibers. But if you're new to this, let me give you a quick synopsis on fiber type. If you were to look at a whole muscle, you would see that it was made up of thousands and thousands of muscle cells or muscle fibers. And some of those muscle fibers would be classified as slow twitch, and these would be fatigue resistant. Think of them as your endurance type fibers because they utilize oxygen, are more aerobically based, whereas the fast twitch fibers don't utilize as much oxygen, are more anaerobically based, but they can contract with more velocity, produce more force, but they tap out quicker, meaning they don't have as much fatigue resistance. And activities that would engage your fast twitch fibers are things like sprinting, jumping, or even heavy resistance training. And it's actually good we brought up the fast twitch fibers because again, we're talking about why should everyone consider this type of training, especially if Zone 2 is mostly going to cause physiological adaptations directly with the slow twitch fibers. Well, we're gonna make the case that developing those slow twitch fibers through Zone 2 training is going to also have some indirect benefits for these fast twitch fibers. Consistent Zone 2 training helps to promote the development of new capillaries, which are tiny exchange vessels that exchange nutrients and waste products between the bloodstream and the tissues, and muscle tissue would be included in this. So think we're literally growing more of these tiny tubes or tiny capillaries. They're gonna penetrate into the muscle tissue, bringing in more blood and more oxygen, which those slow twitch muscle fibers are going to be more than happy to gobble up that extra oxygen during those aerobic activities, and you could see how that could improve fitness. Not only can we bring in more oxygen, but if we have more capillaries and more blood, we can bring in more of other substances like fats and carbohydrates, which could be utilized to create the energy currency of our muscle cells or muscle fibers, that ATP. And fat is gonna be more important in just a second because we're gonna talk about how Zone 2 primarily utilizes fat. But bringing in more carbs can also be beneficial to those fast twitch muscle fibers because they primarily utilize glucose, a carbohydrate. And so you can see that's one of our indirect benefits to the fast twitch fibers through this Zone 2 training. Now, we also want to think it's not just about bringing in more substances to the muscle tissue with this increased capillarization. It's also about being able to more effectively pull things out and away from the muscles, things like metabolic byproducts. So if we're more effective at removing metabolic byproducts from the muscle, that could benefit any of the muscle fiber types. And my favorite physiological benefit that occurs with zone 2 training is that the mitochondria within the slow twitch muscle fibers will increase in size and therefore their work capacity, becoming more efficient. Plus, the overall total number of mitochondria will increase in those slow twitch muscle fibers. And all of us who have taken biology are probably trained to think mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell because it creates ATP in the presence of oxygen, and that is absolutely true. And from an exercise perspective, again, we're just building more upon this. We've increased the blood flow already, we've increased the amount of oxygen we can bring in, and now that oxygen can be funneled into more mitochondria and creating more ATP, which would increase our fitness and our work capacity. But improving and increasing the mitochondria is more than just about improving our fitness and work capacity. There are tremendous metabolic long-term benefits that occur from developing our mitochondria that can help reduce our risk of conditions that plague our society. And I'm definitely going to talk about those in just a second, but first I do need to clear some things up with lactic acid. Lactic acid is a metabolic byproduct from a form of anaerobic metabolism called anaerobic glycolysis. And maybe you've heard of anaerobic glycolysis before, but as the name implies, this is when the cell, or in this case the muscle fiber, would break down glucose to form ATP in the absence of oxygen. And in general, as exercise intensity increases, this would cause the muscle fibers to rely more on anaerobic glycolysis and would therefore result in a buildup or an accumulation of more lactic acid within the muscle fibers. And there are two things that we need to address or clarify with lactic acid. One is that lactic acid, under physiological conditions, primarily exists as lactate in our bodies. Yes, you could likely get away with using lactic acid and lactate interchangeably, as most people in the exercise physiology world would know what you're talking about, but they technically are different. Because as you're going through anaerobic glycolysis and building up lactic acid, it actually quickly dissociates into lactate and a hydrogen ion. And it's that hydrogen ion that contributes to the acidity that's building up within the muscle fiber. And this acidity does need to be dealt with because this could potentially impair or slow the overall function of the muscle fiber. And this buildup of lactic acid, or what we should more appropriately say lactate and the hydrogen ion, can sometimes give lactate a little bit of a bad rap or mischaracterize it, which is the second thing we need to address. Lactate is sometimes referred to as a metabolic waste product. Yes, we have to manage the accumulating levels that can occur during exercise, but it's not like it's this toxic substance that our body is trying to rid itself of or excrete. It is a metabolic byproduct because we're going to find that when oxygen becomes more readily available again, say like when you decrease your exercise intensity, or maybe there's some cells or tissues that are close by to those exercising muscles that have more oxygen available, what we're going to see is that that lactate can be transported into the mitochondria to make more ATP. So let's use an exercise example to illustrate how cool this is. Let's say we start off exercising at a light to moderate intensity. And at that level of intensity, we should have enough oxygen available to produce ATP for our working muscles through mostly aerobic pathways, which means we're primarily going to be recruiting those slow twitch muscle fibers and mostly using fat in the mitochondria as our energy source. But as we increase the intensity, let's say we're jogging and we increase our running speed, or this could even be applied to certain weight training scenarios. Maybe we're doing multiple repetitions of heavy squats. The point is we're increasing the intensity. And as we increase that intensity, we're going to have to start recruiting some of those fast twitch muscle fibers and starting to shift to more of those anaerobic pathways like anaerobic glycolysis. And we know that we can only maintain a certain level of intensity for a certain amount of time. The higher the intensity, the less amount of time that we can sustain it for before we either have to back off, slow down, or even just rest. And what's happening is we're depleting our ATP while we're accumulating more lactate. So what is our body going to do about this? So you'll likely notice that when you pull back from a bout of high intensity exercise or enter this rest and recovery phase, that you'll be breathing heavy. And you might think, why would I need to breathe heavy if high intensity exercise is mostly requiring anaerobic pathways or anaerobic metabolism that doesn't require oxygen? Well, it's not like the aerobic pathways just shut down. You're essentially getting to this point of intensity where you just can't bring the oxygen into the muscle, the mitochondria, and process it fast enough. So then you have to shift to and rely on other energy systems that are faster, like the anaerobic glycolysis. But the drawback of that is they're fast, but they don't produce much ATP. And so you can only sustain that for a short amount of time. And we get to this problem that we mentioned earlier where we've diminished the ATP within the muscle and also accumulated lactate. And this is one of the main reasons why you're breathing heavily during those rest periods, because you're trying to deal with this. And one of the things you're going to do is actually replenish the ATP by breathing in all that oxygen and replacing it aerobically by utilizing fats and even carbohydrates, but also we can utilize that lactate that we mentioned earlier. It's almost like hitting two birds with one stone. We need to bring down the lactate, and we can do that when oxygen is present because we can funnel it into the mitochondria, like I mentioned earlier, and help to bolster up ATP even further, which is ridiculously amazing. And so we're gonna talk about two pathways that we can deal with this lactate, one right at the local level, at the muscle we just exercised, as well as systemically throughout the body. So let's say you consistently participate in zone 2 training. You improve the size and quality of your mitochondria and even increase the overall number within those slow twitch muscle fibers. Based on that, you could see that that would make you better equipped to process increasing levels of lactate that occurs during exercise and even aid in recovery. And yes, it's those slow twitch muscle fibers that primarily benefit or have those physiological adaptations from zone 2 training, like creating these higher quality and higher number of mitochondria. But again, that doesn't mean that the fast twitch fibers cannot benefit from this. The fast twitch fibers actually produce the majority of lactate, but they don't have a lot of mitochondria. So they're gonna need a little bit of help processing the lactate they produce. And one of the cool things that can happen is that the lactate produced in, say, like a fast twitch fiber could be transferred to a neighboring slow twitch fiber within the same muscle, therefore making it easier for the fast twitch fibers to also recover more quickly and effectively between bouts of higher intensity exercise. Now, there are going to be limitations to this, and what I mean by that is limitations on how much lactate we can process at the local level within that actual muscle. Yes, if somebody is more fit and they have higher quality and a greater number of mitochondria, they could process more of that lactate. But eventually, no matter who you are, you'll get to a point where it's too much and you'll get some spillover. And what we mean by spillover is when that excess lactate that can't be processed in the muscle alone will spill over and move into the bloodstream. And you can actually measure lactate levels going up as exercise intensity increases. I actually have a lactate meter at home where I can poke my finger, get a little blood, and see what my lactate levels are at. And that's one way to figure out your zone 2. We'll get into that in just a second. But once it's in the bloodstream, you now have the ability to have multiple other cells and tissues help you process this lactate. And one of those is the amazing heart. And yes, I'm a little ashamed of this because we are in an anatomy lab and I tried to draw real hard, just didn't work well. So this is what we get. But the amazing heart has these cardiac muscle fibers that also can improve their mitochondrial number and their quality through consistent training. And so that lactate can go into the muscle cells of the heart, get into the mitochondria of the heart muscle fibers, and make more ATP. We can also send that lactate to the liver. Now, the liver does something a little different. Instead of funneling it into mitochondria and creating more ATP out of it, it will actually convert that lactate into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, which is pretty beneficial because that can help maintain blood glucose levels, and that glucose could be utilized later on for future production of ATP. So how do you actually do zone 2 training and find your own personal zone 2? Well, at the beginning of the video, we mentioned zone 2 is a form of steady state cardio done at a moderate intensity. And that steady state is important. When you're doing zone 2 training, you don't want to be bouncing between the different training zones or different training intensities and just average it out to zone 2. You actually want to stay just within that zone 2 throughout the duration of the exercise session. And that will give you the most physiological benefits and adaptations. Now, if you've never heard of the different training zones, that's okay. The endurance athlete world talks about these training zones a lot. Sometimes they have 5 zones, 6 zones, 7 zones. I personally like the 5, but 1 would be the easiest, 5 would be the hardest. And again, we're gonna mostly focus on this zone 2, obviously. And we're gonna talk about how to find it with the cheapest way, just by yourself, all the way up to paying people and buying your own equipment. So let's start with the least expensive way, and actually one of the most effective ways to find your zone 2. And by least expensive, I mean free, and that is the talk test. Zone 2 should be done at a level of intensity where you could still maintain a conversation with someone. Not at this level of conversation, it needs to be more difficult than that. But if you were on the phone with someone while you were doing Zone 2 training, they could tell that you were exercising. They could tell that you were breathing more heavily, but you could still maintain the majority of that conversation. You might have to take a few breaths in between sentences, but you could get full sentences out. And the nice thing about this is it's actually fairly accurate when you compare it to laboratory testing, which we'll talk about some of those tests after we get to my least favorite method of checking for Zone 2, and that is based upon heart rate zones. Using heart rate zones, or I should say a percentage of your max heart rate, to find your Zone 2 isn't my favorite, at least initially, because there's some variation in this. Some will say that 60 to 70% of your max heart rate is where you'd find your Zone 2. Others will say 65 to 75%. So you can see there's a wide range there. Plus, you would need to know what your true max heart rate is. There are crude equations to help you with this, like 220 minus your age and some other equations, but there are plenty of people where these calculations are quite a bit off. And so if you just don't have any of that data and you're just basing it off of these percentages, you may not be in your true Zone 2. Now, if you were to go to a lab and find your actual max heart rate, that could start to narrow it down and make this way of finding your Zone 2 a little bit more accurate. But taking it a step further to the next testing method to get what we call lactate testing is even better. Lactate testing is when you test the amount of lactate in your blood. And we know that Zone 2 occurs at a blood lactate level of about 1.9 to 2.0 millimoles. So you'd want to stay in that 1.9 to 2.0 range throughout the duration of your exercise. Now, are you going to go to a professional lab and have this done? Are you going to buy your own blood lactate meter? Those are questions you would have to answer for yourself. But the limitation of going to a professional lab is it would tell you your blood lactate on that day in that moment. And you could correlate your 2.0 or your 1.9 or 2.0 with the heart rate that it occurred at, and you could use that as somewhat of a training protocol. But lactate levels can change and vary from day to day. For example, if you're more fatigued, you had a really intense exercise week, you're more fatigued, that could change your blood lactate level and how it correlates with your heart rate, and even improvements in fitness could change this a little bit. So the most accurate way, you could maybe even consider it the craziest way, $300 to $400 crazy, I guess, because that's what a lactate meter would cost. And you could just test yourself while you're exercising in Zone 2 periodically throughout the week. And just to reiterate, if you're just starting out with this Zone 2 training, that talk test is a really good place to start. I've actually done some nerdy testing on my own where I've run in Zone 2 while talking and just trying to see if I can stay in it with doing the talk test. And I've used my lactate meter alongside with it, and it actually is pretty close to that 2 millimoles. So good place to start. And then if you're using wearables with heart rate monitors, you can start to narrow in about that range of where your heart rate would be with your Zone 2. But one of the things you're probably also wondering is frequency. How often should I be doing this? Well, when people are first starting off and they haven't done much exercise at all, we try to get them to at least 1 to 2 hours starting off, with the ideal of them getting to 3 to 4 hours a week. I like to at least get 4 hours a week. And then the next question is, people will sometimes say, well, can I lump that time into 1 or 2 sessions, especially if they're starting out that 1 to 2 hour range? And if that's all you're gonna give me is like 1 to 2 days a week, then we would definitely take it. But the ideal way of doing this for the maximum physiological changes and benefits would be to spread it out throughout the week with 45-minute to 60-minute sessions about 3 to 4 days a week. Now, clearly Zone 2 training isn't the only form of training that would be recommended if someone's concerned about their overall fitness, health, and longevity. You'd want to incorporate strength training as well, and ideally even adding one higher intensity cardio day, like a VO2 max day that we've actually done a video on, and we'll link that to this video. And people who are just concerned about this overall general health, fitness, and longevity, and they're just wanting to have good strength, good cardiovascular fitness, you can get a pretty good split by doing, say, like 3 weight training or strength training days, 3 cardio days, and you can almost have your cardio and strength training on different days. But if you're throwing a VO2 max session in there as well, sometimes you're gonna have to double up some of the cardio and the strength training on the same day. Now, if you were to do a workout where you did like strength at the beginning and your Zone 2 right after it, or vice versa, would you make gains in both of those areas if you consistently maintained your routine over the long term? Absolutely. But if you're one of those that's extremely concerned about maximizing your strength gains and maybe even hypertrophy training, getting a little bit bigger, then it would be best if you actually separated the workouts by a few hours, or at least maybe you did your strength training in the morning and your cardio training in the later afternoon. And I do want to repeat one thing that I mentioned earlier. When you're doing zone 2, you really want to stay steady within zone 2. When people sometimes figure out their heart rate range for their zone 2, they'll sometimes get into this workout where their heart rate spikes, goes down, goes above zone 2, below zone 2, but then when they look at their data after, they're like, oh, my average heart rate was within my zone 2. You don't want to be doing that. That's not nearly as effective. You want to stay right within that zone 2. I kind of think of it as this churning and this constant stimulation to your mitochondria, teaching those mitochondria to utilize and metabolize fats more effectively, and creating this metabolic efficiency or even metabolic flexibility. And what you can kind of think of that meaning is that you get really good at teaching your body how to maximize the use of your macronutrients. You're using the fats how you need to use the fats. You're using the carbohydrates how you're supposed to be using the carbohydrates, which is pretty much the opposite of what occurs with things like metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, and even diabetes. And this is one of the most important health benefits with zone 2 training, creating this metabolic efficiency or flexibility. And I apologize it took me so long to get here, but unfortunately, these metabolic dysfunctions are pretty prevalent in our society. And someone with like type 2 diabetes, the body is not processing or metabolizing fats properly. It's not metabolizing carbohydrates properly, and then you get insulin resistance. So if there is anything close to a magic bullet to help reduce our risk of these metabolic dysfunctions like type 2 diabetes and even push some of them into remission, zone 2 training would be one of the items right at the top of the list. And of course, it wouldn't be an Institute of Human Anatomy video if I didn't get a chance to say how excited I am about one of my favorite lifelong learning tools, and that is Brilliant. Brilliant.org is an amazing interactive online learning platform for STEM subjects, and I really believe it is one of the best and most fun, engaging ways to learn math, science, and computer science. I've been using Brilliant for almost 2 years now, and it has definitely helped me to refine and sharpen past skills as well as develop new ones. I recently started one of their new lessons called Exploring Data Visually, which is all about analyzing and interpreting data from visualizing charts and graphs, which has definitely been helpful for me. Plus, Brilliant is constantly adding more of these lessons each and every month, so you'll definitely find lessons and courses that are applicable to you no matter where you are on your educational journey. So if you're interested in checking out this amazing learning platform, go to brilliant.org/IHA to start a free 30-day trial. Plus, the first 200 people will get 20% off their annual subscription. We'll also include that information and the link in the description below. Thanks for watching our crazy anatomy videos, everyone. Like and subscribe if you feel the need. And of course, leave some comments below. Let us know what you thought of the video, what you think of zone 2 training, and if you're going to incorporate it into your weekly routine. And we'll see you next time.